Mackenzie! Did you know that Canada has some of the best documented alien encounters and UFO sightings in the world? And I'm not talking fame levels here. Of course, more people know about Roswell than they do about, say, Shag Harbor. But as far as hard evidence and official documentation goes, Canada can't be beat. Most USA cases tend to go unrecognized in an official capacity. When the RCMP gets involved, however, there is a pretty concrete paper trail that you can track through the beginning to the end of the incident. For those of you who listen to our podcast, this is something that we've actually already seen in a couple of the cases that we've already covered, such as Shag Harbor, or to a slightly lesser extent, the Cabbagetown monster. There is one incident that has actually been deemed the most well-documented incident to date in Canada. And I'm going to tell you a little about it today.
It was 50 years ago this weekend since the historic 1967 Falcon Lake UFO encounter. It happened to a local man and is considered one of the most documented and remarkable UFO encounters in Canada, if not the world.
On May 20th, 1967, amateur geologist Stefen Michalak was visiting Falcon Lake, Manitoba on a prospecting mission for quartz. While he was working on some of the rock outcroppings along the side of the lake, he was startled by a flock of geese flying overhead. Now, well, that in itself is scary enough, and if you are not from Canada or you don't know anything about the way Canadian geese act, just take my word for it that they are basically devil spawn. When Michalak turned to see what had startled the geese into flight, he noticed that there were two glowing orb-like objects in the sky descending down towards the lake. As he watched them make their descent, he noticed that one of them did stop about partway to the lake, turn around, and swoop away. However, the second one landed on a rock outcropping just a few hundred feet away from him. Now, initially, though mildly concerned but relatively calm, Stefen actually sat back and made some sketches of the UFOs. He at first actually believed it to be an American military craft that had come over across the border. Now remember, this is in the middle of the Cold War, so people were more inclined to believe that kind of thing was happening. However, well, Michalak was initially willing to keep his distance and quite happy to do so. His curiosity did get the better of him, and he ended up approaching the craft. As he approached, he noticed that the air around the craft was very warm and actually smelled very strongly of sulfur. He also noticed that the craft was extremely noisy. It was giving a lot of whirs and buzzes and mechanical noises that made him think that maybe they were having some sort of technical mechanical difficulties, and that's why they had landed there. When he got closer to the craft and reached out to touch it, it was so hot that it actually burned the fingertips of his gloves. Still undeterred, however, Michalak actually noticed that he could also hear voices coming from inside the craft. One of them was of a higher pitch than the other one and gave him the impression of human occupants. So, believing that he was still dealing with a terrestrial craft at this point, he started calling out to them. He started off in English, still thinking that this was an American craft that was having mechanical difficulties. He called out to offer mechanical help to the Yankee boys if they needed it. When he still didn't receive a response, he tried again in his native Polish, and then twice more in Russian and German. When that didn't work, he started to circle the craft a little bit more and noticed that there was a small door that was open on the side. When he looked in, however, the only thing that he could see was a series of panels of blinking, flashing lights. He only got a quick glimpse of those before three doors shuttered closed in front of him, and the craft started to turn. As the craft rotated, a panel opened on the side, and a grid-like pattern of holes on the exterior of the craft sprayed Michalak with scorching hot gas. The heat was so intense that it actually set fire to his shirt and his hat, and he was forced to discard them as he fled the scene. This actually left him with first-degree burns on his stomach in the same grid-like pattern that he claimed to have seen on the side of the ship. After that, and perhaps rightly so, Michalak was so frightened of the experience that he fled to the woods on the side of the lake and stayed there until he could deem that the coast was clear and make his way back to his hotel. As he started walking along his way, he encountered an RCMP officer driving in the opposite direction. He flagged him down, and that RCMP officer is actually one of the first officers to make a report of the incident later that day. The report itself states that the officer had found Michalak on the side of the road in a state of distress. He was agitated and refused help, claiming that the officer would be in danger of radiation poisoning should he come too close. The officer also reported that his appearance was not dissimilar to that of a person who has overindulged, though he could not smell any alcohol. He was treated for his injuries at a hospital in Winnipeg, but for weeks after that he suffered extreme headaches, diarrhea, blackouts, and significant weight loss, which are all signs of radiation poisoning. After relaying the incident to Canadian authorities, he underwent a complete physical and psychological exam at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Now, that exam found him to be sound of mind and not hallucinating the experience. However, there is a little bit of a strange incident that happened with that clinic as the story progressed.
To explain this, none of the doctors here in Winnipeg could do so. It was decided eventually by his doctor to send him to Mayo Clinic, and here is really the freaky part of the whole thing. He went there, he was examined. We know this because he has all kinds of documentation proving he was there. His plastic card, his letters of introduction. When he came back, his doctor, of course, wanted to resume this business here. Nothing was sent back. Letters were sent to Mayo Clinic, and nothing came back except the bills, which he proceeded to pay bit by bit through a money order. He has all of this documentation. We finally got a letter back after a year or so of trying, saying, in effect, that they don't know anything about Stefen Michalak. That, as far as they could find out, he's never been there. And yet we have all of this documentation proving that he was.
Now, if that isn't enough, it does get a little bit stranger. The investigation later went on to actually take a look at the site. There they discovered Steven's shirt and gloves along with some of his prospecting tools, and they underwent a rigorous examination at an RCMP crime lab, to which they were unable to determine the source of the burns. The landing site itself was a circle of about 15 feet in diameter, completely devoid of the moss and vegetation that was present on the rock outcroppings nearby. Soil samples, along with samples of his clothing, were sent off and tested and found to be radioactive. They even recovered from the site a twisted piece of metal that was also highly radioactive. The case was investigated thoroughly by many levels of government, and locals actually reported over the next couple of weeks a huge amount of helicopters and officers that were in the area just to check out the landing site and interview his family. The official conclusion, however, including one from the US Air Force, was that the event was completely unexplainable. Did Stefen Michalak encounter a UFO on that day in May? Or was the RCMP officer's initial report of substance abuse and possible drunkenness a little bit more on the nose? Skeptic Aaron Sakulich seems to believe the latter. He actually examined the story and published a report stating that it was more likely that Michalak was suffering from substance abuse and perhaps fabricated the story to keep people away from his prospecting area. Aaron, of course, is not alone in his skepticism, but I leave you now with the words of Steven's son, Stan, who was there for every step of the aftermath of these incidents. If Dad hoaxed this, remember we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed it, then he was a freaking genius. Well, was it a hoax or was it not a hoax? I like to think it wasn't, but that'll be up for you guys to decide. I'll see you on Thursday, Kenzie.